for an organization that is wanting to come into this space and wanting to be more diverse in everything that they do, what is the ideal starting point? How do they, before we even get to data measurements, what's the starting point? What would you say?
Can I
Oh, go ahead, please. Yes.
Can I jump in? Well,
Yes,
I want to piggyback and answer that question based off what the doctor said, and that is commitment. Because just as mentioned earlier from the doctor, that it's this thing that when it's in the news, all of a sudden it's like DEI, we gotta get diversity, equity, and inclusion, because there's a new headline and there's a new story. And we really need to shift that thinking and make it a part of everyday culture, not just when there's a new news story that hits headlines. And that takes commitment. And that goes back to what Kimberly said about culture and values. Like, it's got to be a part of the everyday culture and value that's top of mind, not just as something that's in passing when we have time for, or when there's a big news article and we want to make sure the company looks good.
Yeah, you're so right, because I think also too, we're just piggybacking off each other, because I know this panel is outstanding, so it's easy. This is easy to do. But I will say this. I will say this as well. I think that companies are very quick to throw training at the problem.
Yeah,
training is not the answer. And so I think what happened, and listen, this is not a negative to any organization or our clients, right? Because people just don't know what to do, right? They say we have to start diversity somewhere, right? And so the first thing is, let's train everybody, right? But what are you training everybody for, right? Where's the application? Is the culture ready for the application of the training that's going to take place, right? We always ask our clients when we get huge requests, unconscious bias training, right? And I'm sure the panelists will say, yeah, So we'll get all these requests for unconscious bias training. And I will tell you, we can easily do it, and, it would be great for great for our firm. But I push back on 90% of the requests. And I push back, very respectfully, in the sense of, what's the symptom of the organization first, right? So I think our participants who we're talking with, we're all saying the same thing to some degree. But what I have to drive home, I think, is that, one, training is not the answer. Two, you have to look at the culture. It goes back to what one of our other panelists said about emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence. Is the organization ready for the data, for the change, for the programs, for the initiatives, all of these things? So what I also will say to this, and I'll pause because I would love to hear from our other panelists, is that you've got to set expectations, right? And actually address issues, right? Because the minute you throw training at it, then we walk away from it, right? Because, training is going to take place. That's the magic bullet. People are going to do well and not going to say things that are going to get us in trouble. And people are going to know how to manage people that don't look like them or don't have the same personalities, whatever the case may be. So we have to also have knowledge and sensitivity. And where that comes in at is one of the things we do. We have to have an assessment. You have to understand where the culture is. The data that's easy to get, right? Because companies have data all over the place, but we can pull it all together. I know that folks on our call, we could pull it all together eventually. It may take us a month or 2 or 6 months, but we'll pull it together. Data is not the issue. The assessment is understanding where's leadership on this, right? How is the DEI council or leadership council driving or governing any types of action plan, right? Because you have to have a strategy. We know all that. Strategy, that's great. But you've got to start with the assessment, not training. If you have to do training, great. But you have to do it in concert with understanding the pulse of the culture and the organization. That's why we've seen so many of the big companies kind of stall right now, because they were at a starting gate, right? During COVID. And now people are having to dial back a bit because they're racing to a finish line that does not exist. You have to go to the pace of the culture. You have to also have to craft and build the culture simultaneously, but you have to get that assessment done. You have to have the assessment first so you know what the game plan is and you'll know how to move forward.
If I can just jump in
I love that.
for something there.
Yes,
Yeah, I
ma'am.
agree.
Go ahead.
And I'm loving looking at all the comments. One of the things that happened for us as a result of COVID and then the murder of George Floyd was an increased attention to inequities, marginalization, underrepresentation, exclusion, and it created this appetite in the citizens of Edmonton, in our leadership, and all their employees to be wondering what's going on. And there has been such a significant change in the interest and intention, so the heart set in terms of changing, in terms of equity, and it's just opening up the door. And we don't want the door to close. This is what someone, I can't remember who mentioned sustainability. We need to keep this door open. But this is an unprecedented opportunity in my career to actually do amazing work that's fully supported by leadership. And all of this works together.
And you did say, and the doc had said that it has to be personal to the organization. So one thing which will work for one organization might not necessarily work for another organization, which is where the assessments that you had talked about comes in. But then what are best practices? So because there have been so many great comments here and questions. So one of the things is, what would you say the best practices are? What are suitable benchmarks to be looking at when we put these things in place, when we have these measures in place?
One of the tools that we used when we were developing our framework was the Global Diversity, Equity, Inclusion benchmarks. If you Google that, you can find them. It's 15 benchmarks with a list of actions. You can use that as part of your assessment of your organization's, where your organization is in their DEI journey. So I find that is a very helpful tool. And I feel like I had something else brilliant to say, but it has escaped me. So I will pass it over to Netta, and then I'll let you know if it comes
I
back.
hope that wasn't my fault, Jill. I'm sorry.
No, not at all. All by myself.
Like,
No, what you shared was beautiful.
Yes, like, can you talk too much?
No, it's great. It is great.
We're
Yes.
so I forget I'm speaking. I'm just enjoying the conference.
Me too.
I know. And you know the beauty about it is, so there is something about when you learn something with a lot of emotion, it sticks. Like, so everybody's going to walk away from here thinking, yes, I gained something, and we're going to implement it because I remember it's like bright in my brain. So don't worry about it. Nada, let's hear what you had to say.
I just wanted to add on to what Jill said, that the global benchmark is a good place to start, but also remembering that every organization is going to have different benchmarks because they all look different. They all have different employees, different sizes. But the key here, going back to what the doctor said, is specificity in the next steps. So being really clear, and depending on your assessment, what are the different pillars that you are measuring in your assessment, then taking each pillar and saying, okay, this is the data that we've collected. Now, how do we move this up 5%? How do we move this up 10%? How do we move this up into the next step? And what does that look like? And then creating that specificity around it. So just a quick example, because I know examples can help. When I was an executive and I walked into a corporation, there was less than 1% diversity when it came to minority and people of color, less than 1% out of an organization of over 200. Okay, so in order to create any kind of inclusion, the first step is we just need to be more diverse in general, right? And so I had to create some really specific benchmarks of, okay, in the next year, I would like to see this team get to at least 15% in the next year with more diverse team members. And that was a specific goal that I worked towards with recruiting and getting top talent and really making sure that we can have a diverse team to create any kind of inclusion. Because in order to have inclusion, we have to have diversity first as well. And so that was a very specific goal. And so I think that that's really going to be the key, is the looking at the data. And even it's that incremental growth, like the doctor said, how do I move it up one little step, 5%? Or how do I move it up to that next level? And what is that specificity around it is going to be critical.
No question about it. No question. But go ahead, doctor. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add, right, that if it's not bespoke, then that's when it starts to feel like a checklist, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, for those who are interested in doing some additional research, I'll sort of point you to some work in the Journal of Business Ethics. It's called Generative Interactions, right? And what that is again, the emphasis on the way to create a fertile environment to achieve EDI is high quality, high frequent interactions. So how do you deal with unconscious bias if you don't have some folks who are diverse in the organization and you provide frequent opportunities for them to interact with those that might have that unconscious bias, right? So that's where being intentional about the outcomes that are desired becomes extremely crucial. But the most fertile environments, the most successful organizations in achieving EDI will have opportunities for folks to interact frequently, and again, high quality means that they're not superficial. So whether it's sort of project specific, it can be I think one of the earlier speakers said a once a month or once a quarter type meeting, right? I mean, what's the intention? Like, what's the quality? How do people feel empowered with whatever task they've been given as a collective, right? So that again, it doesn't feel like they're just checking a box. So the quality of the opportunity to work together, but also the frequency with which those which various individuals in the organization get to interact with folks who do not look, sound, talk like them, I think is key to achieving desired outcomes.